No pressure, but the Jets are about to play the biggest game of their season against the Colorado Avalanche. Who will prevail in what could determine whether the Jets are at home or on the road in the first round of the playoffs? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Indeed, because Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring right now. Terms and conditions do apply. Now, like I said, the Jets are about to take on perhaps the biggest game of their entire season. And I know that people say this in a lot of contexts. This one, it's pretty freaking legit. This is the biggest game of the year. This is the one that probably decides whether the Jets are at home or on the road against the Colorado Avalanche in round one of the playoffs. And make no mistake, the Jets are probably playing the Avs, right? Dallas has a reasonably decent hold on the first spot. You know, they're 5 points ahead. And look, they do have 2 games left, and the Jets have 3. Both the Colorado Avalanche and the Jets do have those 3 games. But unless Dallas loses both of their next 2 games, it is highly unlikely that either Colorado or Winnipeg are really going to be fighting for the Central Division crown. So at this point, what's left is to basically try and win out and get home ice advantage. That is a huge deal for the Jets, because if Winnipeg wins this next game, right, and even if they were to maybe lose the following game, guess what? Does not matter, because the Jets will own the tiebreaker. It will not matter what Colorado does in their last game of the year. So this one is a big deal. And when you look at Colorado's home versus their road form, it is like night and day. At home, the Avs are 38-1. That is pretty freaking amazing. That's one of the best home records in the entire NHL. In fact, it might just be about the best home. It is the best home record. That's pretty crazy. 30 wins on home ice. Very, very impressive record. And then you think to yourself, well, okay, if they're so good at home, why are they third in the division? Well, you look at the road record, and it is a lot less flattering, 19-16-5. And to be clear, that's not awful, but it's also not particularly great. That's a weaker record than almost everyone else in the playoff spot in the West, right? The only team that has a worse road form is Vegas, and Vegas has kind of been up and down this year. But, you know, given the Avs have had a fair bit of, you know, injuries and stuff over the years, over the season, I can understand why. You know, Rantanen has missed time. Landeskog has obviously been out. There's been a couple of key contributors throughout the season where Colorado has had to try and, well, honestly, scrounge around and reassemble a lineup, which is why I really feel like when they traded for Middlestat and Walker, it was kind of out of necessity more so than just a nice to have. This team has legitimately gone through the ringer, and, you know, the post-cup, I guess you could call hangover, has definitely hit them pretty hard. But so far, they've managed to really recover. I mean, this team obviously has some big problems, but comparatively speaking, where they were at the start of the year and where they are now, they look like they're in pretty decent shape. Now, their last 10 games have been a little bit mediocre, right? They're 5-4-1, and there are some bad losses in there, which maybe means that the Jets have a chance to come away with a huge win. They've definitely been scoring lots of goals, but they have also been conceding loads as well. And so that's where I think the Jets are potentially in a really good spot here, is with the goaltending. Now, all that said, Colorado's going to be rolling out a pretty dangerous lineup of Duran, McKinnon, and Lehkonen, Nichushkin, Middlestat, and very possibly Rantanen. He might actually be back for this game, which for both teams is obviously a huge deal. Rantanen might be about as important to this squad as McKinnon is, which is crazy to say because I think a lot of people really overlook just how good Rantanen is. In years where McKinnon maybe wasn't at the most elite level of his play, Rantanen has kind of always been the guy who's just been one of the true rocks and foundational pieces for this team, even though it's usually McKinnon and Landeskog that get all the credit. Now, the depth is where the Jets might also have a real chance to make hay, right? You take out the top six, and suddenly you're left with Duhaime, Colton, and Parise, which, as a third line, it's decent. But then Cogliano, Trenin, and Kiviranta aren't exactly a world-beating trio either, right? So the third and fourth lines are where I think, Winnipeg's dominant third line. They're typically good fourth line, and also, the resurgent second line could probably really do some damage. Now, what I'm worried about with Winnipeg is it sounds like they're not going to really make too many lineup changes. They're going to dress another forward and defender at practice tomorrow because some guys are banged up. But assuming that all the line combos are going to stay the same, which for the most part it sounds like they are, it does ring pretty true to what Bones said earlier today. I think, this could be a tough game, right? It's going to come down to what happens with this top line. If Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde can keep up and actually just be break even, I'm not even asking for outplaying their opponents, just be break even, Winnipeg will have a shot. It's not going to be a clear chance that I would say they're going to win their matchups. I'd honestly be surprised if they just get to around 50% expected goal share. If they can do that, I think it would help out a lot for the rest of the lines. But I'm not entirely confident. I got to be honest, I do worry a little bit about these matchups. I'm a little concerned that the top line might get killed. And I guess the other question is, Pionk has really, 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 really struggled. And I feel like I can't overstate this enough. Relative to his expectations and what he's done the last few years, this is some of the worst hockey we've ever seen from Neil, to the point where I'm actually anointing Logan Stanley a better defender. And me and Stanley, we've had an on and off relationship the last few years, but generally speaking, I'm less in favor of his defensive impact. But he might honestly be better than Neil at this stage of Pionk's career, which is pretty crazy to say. Pionk, a few seasons ago looked pretty decent, but that was when you didn't really have as much cross-divisional play thanks to the bubble and everything. Now, though, it's been I'm not going to lie, it's been a brutal year. And with the Jets desperately needing a big performance from some key contributors on this team, I really want to know what the final ice time looks like, because this is going to be a pretty critical game. I think it's going to be one that's going to be a huge predictor for the postseason, not necessarily one that's going to, give us it's not going to decide the series necessarily, but I think it'll give us some insight into, how the Jets matchups are going to be and whether Winnipeg can really come out with a big victory here. I think it's very critical that the Jets come out fast and that they show that they can slow down Colorado's speed like they did earlier this year, because that is one of the things that has traditionally killed the Jets against this team. Now, I would say compared to how they played against Dallas this year, overall, the Jets have looked a little bit better against Colorado, but, make no mistake, with how the Avs have played recently and with some of the reinforcements, not a squad that you can take lightly. I think this is a really big game. Obviously, it'll be a critical decider for who goes home first. I think it'd really be a huge advantage for the Jets to have home ice advantage. I think Winnipeg needs to make the most of this opportunity, and anything less than a win is probably not great news for the Jets. So, a lot to consider. If they do lose, you would have to hope that Colorado loses the second game and Winnipeg wins the final game of the season. The final couple of games here, I think that'd be really important for the Jets. But I think for Winnipeg, the stakes are very high. This is a critical performance, with a couple of games remaining between these two teams. This is crunch time. And I did misspeak earlier. I said, the final game wouldn't matter as much. Apologies. There's actually, including tomorrow, 3 games left. So it does matter a little bit. But obviously between all 3 games, this is the one that really does have the potential to, I would say, decide, home ice advantage for the Jets. So big deal, critical game, could be a huge playoff preview. And, I'm cautiously excited, right? I don't want to say that I'm nervous about this game, but I think for the stakes and everything, this is a big deal and really one of the biggest games the Jets have played in a regular season in some time. So get excited, be a little bit nervous, but, look forward to what could be a critical playoff preview tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. But obviously, The Jets aren't the only teams that are really pushing for final spots here. As Winnipeg winds its own season down, I wanted to spend some time talking about a couple of playoff seeds right now, what we're kind of looking at for the postseason picture, and which teams I feel confident in actually getting through the first round or so. We've obviously had a lot of movement, not only in the West, but especially the East. The Eastern playoff race continues to be an absolute mess, and we'll talk about that and why it's been so crazy in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Obviously, for someone like me who goes to a lot of metal concerts, I'll be honest, having some sort of life insurance is pretty helpful. I've had some pretty serious injuries. I've busted up my arm, which I don't know if you can see, but I've had pretty extensive surgery. And the last thing I want to do is really put my family or any of my loved ones in a tough spot. And so it's great to have Policy Genius who can help with a great life insurance program because, let's be honest, you never know when something could happen, and you want to be prepared as much as humanly possible. So if you're ready to get started, I think this is a great opportunity for you to really not only insure yourself, but also insure everything for your family. I know it sounds a little bit dark, but I mean, that's the reality, right? You never know what's going to happen to you in life, and you always want to make sure that you and the people you care about are taken care of. Check life insurance off your to-do list with no time in using Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockdownnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockdownnhl. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about a couple of different things. Obviously, Winnipeg is about to play perhaps the biggest game of the year against Colorado. Huge deal, very important, very high stakes. And for the Jets, this is a game that they really can't afford to drop, in my opinion, right? I think this is probably the most important one of the season, and it could be ultimately what decides their entire playoff picture. But obviously, like I said before, the Jets aren't the only team trying to figure out where on earth they're going to finish the season in the standings. We're going to take a brief look across both the East and West to see what's going on right now. And then later on in the episode, we're going to talk about some of the remaining playoff races and which teams might be the most exciting to sort of not really bandwagon, but keep an eye on as everyone is finalizing their playoff runs and potentially their playoff legacies. But before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know something really cool for those of you who watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV. If you find yourself having to turn down the volume because there's so much shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Follow Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, out east, I think this has been one of the weirdest playoff races we've ever seen. Really, it comes down to one division being very good and one being a bit of an abomination, right? And if you look at the division that's an abomination, you've got the Rangers and Hurricanes currently in the 1-2 positions, but when you think about the context of how the Rangers have been this year and how the Canes have traditionally been in the postseason, it's really hard to feel like you have a good read on either team. For my money, I think, the Canes might be the more consistently strong of the two, but Carolina has really struggled in the postseason when it seems like they run out of gas, right? This is a good Canes team, but I feel like at the very end of all of it, there's something that misses missing from the roster. And I think it's really that elite finishing talent that a lot of top end teams tend to have. And that's not to say that the Canes don't score a lot. They actually have, one of the higher goal totals in the Eastern Conference. And, they've also generally been pretty stingy. They're not conceding a lot. And if the Panthers and Jets weren't conceding even less, Carolina would be in the conversation for the Jennings Trophy. So, as a squad that has been around the block a fair few times and has shown a lot of skill, but perhaps has never parlayed it into playoff success. I think this run for them might be one of the most important because they're probably going to see some players depart. I heard Martin Necas might be on the chopping block. Shea may leave. So, Pesce could be on the way out. I think that there's a number of players who are, perhaps not going to be around for much longer. And Carolina doesn't really have, I would say, a lot of immediate replacements for stuff. So a lot to consider there. I think with the Rangers, you look at them having a really lethal power play and high-end scoring ability, but then you look at the depth and you start to wonder how much, Shesterkin can really cover for that. As good as Shesterkin is and as good as the top six can be, I don't know. Like I said, I feel like in the same manner that I have some suspicions about Carolina, I feel like I have one or two suspicions about the Rangers. Not as much. I think they're still a really strong team. But in terms of a squad that I can consider anointing as like a cup contender, yeah, I think they're in that conversation. Not entirely sure how it's going to actually play out in the postseason. They really need this run to, I guess, hit big because I feel like the short-term picture for them and honestly the long-term picture, neither are super, super great. So very big playoff run. But like I said, that's the really crappy division. I'm just not even going to talk about the Islanders right now because I think they're a squad that I'm going to more talk about in terms of the wild card race. I think that's the more interesting conversation. But panning over real quick to the Atlantic, you've got Boston, Florida, and Toronto in that order. And then Tampa is definitely locking down the first wild card spot. The Atlantic this year has been pretty good overall. The Bruins, I don't think I'm as confident in of having a deep playoff run. I think their general goal scoring production and stuff has been decent, but you see that they've padded a lot of their standings points with overtime losses, which I feel like that's not a great indicator. If you're not winning games outright in regulation, it's not ideal, right? It could be worse. You could definitely be a team that's just completely driven by overtime losses. But people said that about the Islanders, and guess what? The Islanders have as many overtime losses as the Bruins do. Now, granted, they have 9 less victories, but by the same token, if you're talking about the Bruins and needing to have really good 5v5 goal scoring, that could be a bit of a problem in the postseason. The Panthers are just a really well-balanced team, although I think Paul Maurice hasn't exactly loved how they've played recently. It sounds like he has had more than a few words with his squad. Still one of the best teams in the league, a super, super lethal power play. A little more well-rounded to me than the Rangers are. I know the Rangers are also powered by an elite power play, but I feel like the Panthers have good balance both at even strength and on the man advantage. So very interesting team, not a squad that I'd want to face in the first round. And if Toronto is going to be the team to oust them, could be a big upset, right? Because as decent as the Leafs are, I feel like the Panthers are just better than most of the teams in the league. So yeah, the Panthers, especially being at home in the starting games of the series, could have a decisive advantage. Out west, the Central is a division we just talked about, and I feel like you kind of know what the score is at this point. Dallas is going to win the division. Winnipeg and Colorado are going to try and win out and maybe challenge for that final crown, but are unlikely to catch them. And so at this point, it's about consolidating, the second and third positions. The Pacific is where things get really fun. You've got Vancouver, Edmonton, and LA, and Vancouver actually is in danger of dropping the division crown. They've basically held it for most of the season. And Edmonton, which has 2 games in hand on them and 5 games remaining period, is only 4 points back. I think that is a huge underrated storyline. Edmonton has been one of those teams that people have consistently talked about as being very scary under the surface, even though perhaps the results haven't lined up. But they could catch the Canucks for that top overall seed in the Pacific. And that's a very interesting thing for, probably Nashville, right? Because the Preds are likely to face Dallas in the first round. But if Edmonton is somehow able to catch that points gap, which admittedly is pretty significant, it's an 8-point differential, and they've only got 3 games in hand. So you'd really have to hope the Dallas Stars kind of stumble. But say you somehow get Oilers versus Nashville, right? That'd be a pretty wild series. But as it is right now, it seems like the Oilers are most likely to play the Kings if their current record kind of stays around the same pace. They are on a 3-game winning streak, so they could overtake the Canucks, and that'd certainly be very interesting. But, for Vancouver, perhaps not facing somebody like Vegas would be in their best interest. I think the Knights are surprisingly a frustrating team, and with Mark Stone about to come back, probably not a squad that you want to tangle with as much. But yeah, man, this whole playoff picture is pretty crazy. You've even got the Kings in third place, who, despite kind of fumbling around for the first half of the season, they've seemingly started to find their groove, and I guess they're a pretty decent team, even with some of their biggest players perhaps underperforming. If you've seen the memes about Pierre-Luc Dubois and even some of the jokes about him and Appleton scoring, it is admittedly kind of funny. So something to keep an eye on. But like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the wild card races and stuff, because I feel like there's still a fair bit of room for movement, and there's even a chance that Vegas itself misses the playoffs. We'll talk about how likely that is and what it would actually take for that to really happen. But like I said, before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could also handpick the best stars for your business team? Well, if you're building your talented roster, you need to go with Indeed. Indeed is a hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites making tons of listings and postings for candidates who don't even meet your requirements. Indeed wants to give you powerful tools like instant matching, assessments, and virtual interviews to make it as convenient and as painless as possible. And if you hate waiting, you can be confident, because Indeed's US data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job requirements the moment they sponsor a job. And as someone who has actually used Indeed to look for work myself, I can personally attest to how convenient it is. It's fast, it's painless, it's actually pretty detailed, so it gives you all of the dimensions of an employee that would really make the most sense for a job requirement. It matches your experience and stuff, and it's a great, easy service. And I can only imagine that for people who are looking to hire, it's really got to be great to know that over 3 million businesses are using Indeed as well, who are finding great employees, just like maybe you listening here. This is a great opportunity for you, especially if you've got a small business, because Indeed knows that you only want to pay for, quality applications. You don't have time to waste money, and that's why they're offering you a guaranteed money back if your applications do not satisfy your requirements. So visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. While we're at it, I also wanted to spotlight some of our friends at Factor Meals, because I know a lot of you are probably interested in, eating healthier, especially as we're getting towards spring and summer. And if you want to eat stress-free this spring, go with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly rotation of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, Vegan, and Veggie. You can also discover more than 60 add-ons, whether you're looking for breakfast, lunch on the go, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled throughout the day. It's also really great because you're getting premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, and asparagus. You can also trust that, these are really special dietitian-approved meals that are healthily balanced to give you the exact nutrients and fuel you need to get through your day without all the extra calories and stuff. If you're looking for fast, no fuss, no mess meals that are ready in 2 minutes, go with Factor. And of course, if you're also really environmentally conscious, you can help choose Earth Month Eats badges, which are great options that have some of the lowest carbon emissions on Factor's menu, because they want to be conscious not only of the internal, but the external as well. Head to factormeals.com/lockedonnhl50 and use code LOCKEDONNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus $20 off your next box. That's code LOCKEDONNHL50 at factormeals.com/LOCKEDONNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thanks so much for joining us. As we're just wrapping up really quickly, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the wildcard races, because I feel like this year we've had some of the wildest wildcard chases we've ever seen. Apologies for that alliteration or pun, whatever you want to call it. So I think the biggest weird wildcard race has definitely been out east. you've got the Islanders currently third in the Metro, but they're a team that's not particularly good. And sure, they've won 6 games straight, but it's been by pretty narrow margins. And I think when you're looking at Pittsburgh suddenly on a huge hot streak recently, a big run of form, and suddenly they're really breathing down New York's neck, you might ask yourself if the Islanders are doomed to kind of sink into a second wildcard spot and get matched up against a really tough first-round opponent like Boston. With all of what's happened, though, in the Metro and stuff, it's really funny that the Caps are still technically in the race. They could potentially supplant one of Pittsburgh or the Islanders if they somehow finish out their year with a straight win out. It'd take a lot for it to really happen, but it is entirely possible. And if it does, it'd be really funny because the Caps right now have a minus 42 goal differential, which is one of the worst goal differentials we've ever seen for a team within reach of a playoff spot. The fact that that is happening is just absolutely mind-blowing. The Red Wings are also right there with the Caps, although they've conceded far, far fewer goals. I kind of put both the Caps and the Wings in a pretty lackluster tier of hockey. I just feel like it's not really worth it for either of them to really make the postseason. Maybe revenue-wise, but in terms of big draft capital and assets, maybe better to miss the playoff picture altogether. Out west, I think it's been a little bit less insane. Generally speaking, the playoff picture is pretty set. The only difference and only real change that could come out of this is, with the Knights on a 3-game losing streak, and the Blues with just 3 games remaining in their season, and on a small winning streak of a sort, they have a chance to potentially push the Knights out. And I don't think it's really likely. And in fact, I'd say Vegas has pretty good odds of staying in the second wildcard spot. But I mean, just assume that it happens, right? Craziness occurs. Somehow Vegas really slips in its final 4 games of the season, and St. Louis wins out. The Blues make the second wild card spot. It's a complete Central Division sweep of the wild cards. And, Vegas missing, I think, would probably make a lot of hockey fans happy. I think for the Jets, they would certainly prefer not to have the Knights in the postseason picture because you just never know. When Vegas gets in the playoffs, they are always a huge pain in the butt. They're one of those teams that just never seems to have a quit in them. And, last year they won the Cup. It was a really big pain in the butt because we, of course, saw the Jets lose out in the first round to them. Very painful. And watching a team that kind of embarrassed you in the first round, then go on to win the Stanley Cup makes you feel like you missed a huge opportunity, right? If you had only beaten Vegas, could you have gone on that immense run? Now, I think we all know that probably would not have happened. But, from Winnipeg's perspective, this is a year where they really have to make the most of that run. And I think they would certainly love to not have to go through Vegas again, if at all possible. Colorado, already a big enough challenge as it is, a very tough team. But if you can avoid one of the squads that's really being your boogeyman in the postseason, maybe life will be a little bit better. But, the Jets still have some business of their own to take care of. And it really starts with these final couple of games. This is a big deal. They need to secure that home ice advantage, and they can get one step closer and almost guarantee it if they can beat Colorado tomorrow. But big game, big stakes. This is what we're all excited for. This is what we kind of want from this team. If they can do what they did against Dallas, I'm a little more confident in tomorrow's game and maybe even the playoff picture, but they have to execute that template that they set against a really good forechecking and quick counter team because Colorado is going to be even faster. And, we all know the Jets ain't exactly turning and burning on most nights. So a lot to look forward to. Let me know how you're feeling about this game tomorrow and about Winnipeg's playoff run in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll have an episode this weekend to cover for the one that I missed while I was traveling, and we'll go into the game versus Colorado on that show. But like I said, for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.